Morning, Dougie.
Morning, Jim. How you doing?
Morning, Dougie, okay?
I'm good. Can you hear me okay, Jim?
Oh, aye, brand new, aye, fine.
Good. Everything going okay there, organisation-wise?
Oh, always your staff are well on top, aye, we're fine.
Plenty of practice this week.
We're just a few minutes to go, Dig, then we'll fire off.
Aye, that's fine. My only worry is that my broadband goes. It's been a bit dodgy over the last couple of days, but we'll see what happens.
If it goes, we'll accommodate you, we'll get you to phone in, and the phone will be put on the speakerphone, and we'll get back to you that way. We'll certainly make sure your representation's heard.
Right, okay.
Doug, I'm sure you know anyway because it's been advised in the past, but if you put your camera off, that sometimes allows you enough broadband cover or usage to make sure you certainly get representation heard. But we'll make sure you're sorted, don't worry.
And I'm right in saying, Jim, I've got 3 hours, yeah? Is that right?
invite those who have registered in advance to speak to make their presentation, after which they may be questioned by committee members. No questions may be asked of members. The order of eligible parties being heard will be as follows: third parties objecting to an application, third parties supporting an application, statutory consultees objecting to an application, elected members of Dumfries and Galloway Council who are not members of the Planning Applications Committee, and such members should withdraw from the meeting after making their presentation, and then applicants or their agents. In line with the Coronavirus Scotland Act 2020, Schedule 6, Part 4, covering the exclusion of the public from meetings of local authorities, representatives were offered the option of joining the meeting remotely to deliver their presentation or to provide a written statement to be read out on their behalf. Presentations will be strictly limited to 3 minutes per person, except for national and major developments, which by their very nature are more complex, where the time limit will be 5 minutes. The chairman of the committee will ask you to come to a conclusion if you take too long. Representatives are encouraged to use the time allotted to clarify any points they consider material and address the determining issues. Certain matters are not normally material planning considerations and will not be taken into account by the Council when deciding on a planning application. Representatives should not raise any new matters without explaining why they were not raised earlier with the case officer. Please do not repeat what is in the report, as members will have already read the report. After all the representations have been heard, the meeting is then in formal session and no members of the public may address the committee. The Planning Applications Committee will then proceed to determine the application.
Many thanks, Tracy. Okay, members, we move on to agenda item number 4. This is an application to allow continued extraction of peat until the 1st of July 2030 by way of a fresh planning permission with a variation to condition 1 of planning permission 00/P/4/0231, section 42 at Lochwood Moss, Beatuck. It's a full application, reference number 190996/0 full. The applicant is Everest Limited. The recommendation is to refuse, and the case officer is Andrew Robinson. This is a major application, so each representative will have 5 minutes. But first, Andrew, and all planning officers are online as well this morning. So Andrew, when you're ready, will you take us through your presentation and slides, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me?
Yes. Yes, Andrew.
Okay. Yes. The application site is situated at the foot of a valley on the eastern side of the A701 road, around 4 kilometres south of Beatuck. If we just go on to the next slide, please. The site is generally rectangular in shape and has an area of around 25 hectares. Access is from the northeastern corner. The nearest properties are Lockwood Farm, which is to the southeast, and Mosswood Farm, which is to the northwest, beside the A701. Lockwood Castle, ancient monument, and Lockwood Site of Special Scientific Interest bounds the site in the northeastern corner. Just move on to the next slide, please. So the next few next few slides show photos of the site. So as stated in paragraph 1.2 of the report, the site's been used for the purposes of peat extraction for over 30 years. And this photograph is looking from the northeastern corner and looking west. Next slide, please. This is taken in the northwestern corner and looking southeast across the site. And the next slide is looking south across the site. Go to the next slide, please. And the site can be viewed from you can see it from the A701 as you're approaching Beatuck. So this is heading north. This is taken from a lay-by beside the road, so you can just see the site beneath the trees. And next slide, please. This is the site access. And the next slide shows the U318 road, which accesses the site from the A701. Next slide, please. So as part of the application, existing peat depths in metres has been submitted, and this slide shows the peat depths on the site and also a more detailed breakdown with the grid coordinates. So the northwestern corner of the site has a lower depth between 0.5 metre and 2 metres, where parts of this site have not actually been worked before, although at least half the site has depths in excess of 2 metres. Just go on to the next slide, please. So the proposal's seeking continued peat extraction for a further 10-year period. As part of the proposal, partial restoration of the site has been proposed to commence from after year 7, and this plan shows anticipated depth at the end of this period. And the next slide, please. And the final slide shows the anticipated peat depth at the end of the 10th harvest. And the next slide, please. So in conclusion, officers considered that as restoration is possible at the site, continued extraction operations would be contrary to LDP2 policy NE15 and paragraph 241 of Scottish Planning Policy. It would also go against a key action point in National Planning Framework 3, which is to increase the rate of peatland restoration. Given the well-known adverse environmental and ecological impacts of peat extraction and associated impact on carbon emissions, it is also considered that continued peat extraction would go against the spatial strategy of Local Development Plan 2, which requires all development proposals to support sustainable development, including the reduction of carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions, as well as other climate change considerations and policy statements that have a presumption against continued peat extraction and seek to increase peatland restoration. As such, the application is considered contrary to the development plan and is recommended for refusal.
Thank you, Andrew. Do any members have any questions at this stage for the case officer? If not, we'll proceed to the representatives. Firstly, we have Councillor Dougal Campbell, and Dougal, I'll remind you, I'm sure you know anyway, you'll have 5 minutes, and I will remind you with 30 seconds to go to bring your presentation to a conclusion. Whenever you're ready, Dougal, thank you, just go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Members, in my capacity as your Environment Champion and Chair of our Climate Emergency Cross-Party Working Group, I'm asking you this morning to agree with the officer's recommendation to refuse this application on the basis that it is in direct conflict with the aim of our Climate Emergency Declaration and ambitions set out in our 12-point plan. This application represents a significant test for our commitment to tackling climate change. On 27th of June last year, and following the lead of both the Scottish and UK governments, this council, with cross-party support, declared a climate emergency and approved a 12-point plan to be carbon net zero by 2025. Since then, there's been considerable progress, and work is currently ongoing on an emissions baseline study for the region, which will include emission and sequestration estimates from our peatlands and forestry. And completion of the strategic plan, which will plot our course to be net zero by 2025. Our work to reduce CO2 emissions shouldn't stop there, and we'll have to continue to pursue ways in which to reduce the impact of climate change and in time to achieve and retain a negative carbon status. As you're all aware, over the last 12 months, action on climate change has become a focus for the Council, and a new climate change strategic priority, which will be submitted to full Council for approval next month, will effectively embed action on climate change into our Council's objectives over the coming years. But it's important to stress that reducing CO2 emissions is only one aspect of achieving net zero, and the 12-point plan includes specific reference to protecting biodiversity and the natural environment in our region. And importantly, this relates to protecting our natural capital and naturally occurring carbon sink peat bogs. The Scotland's National Peat Plan sets out Scotland's vision for our peatlands and the protection, management and restoration of peatlands to slow down climate change, restore wetland ecosystems and biodiversity. We're at a tipping point as to all of these factors, and we need to ensure that we don't effectively enable further damage to our peatlands, both on sites which have been developed and undeveloped and degraded. Since our emergency declaration, Holyrood has passed the 2019 Climate Change Act, and again with cross-party support, and the Scottish Government has set out a range of measures and investments which include protection of peatlands and the restoration of degraded peatlands such as Lockwood Moss. And we're fortunate in the region to have the Crichton Carbon Centre, which aims to protect and restore peatlands in our region in recognition of what they provide through carbon sequestration. And in terms of urgency to act now on climate change, I would point members to both the UN Paris Agreement on climate change and the findings of the UK Climate Change Committee. Members, you'll have read report submissions from SNH and SEPA and their objections both to the continued extraction of peat and the inadequacy of the submitted restoration plan, and they speak for themselves, and I'm not going to rehearse them today. But those submissions reflect the need to act now to slow down climate change and identify the harmful effects of continued peat extraction in terms of reducing remaining carbon storage and resulting in CO2 emissions by the degraded peatlands. The UK Climate Change Committee has recommended a ban on commercial peat extraction by 2023, and degraded peatlands are estimated to emit across the UK approximately 16 million tonnes of CO2 annually. And as pointed out in the SEPA submission, Scottish planning policy permits extraction only where restoration is impossible. As pointed out by SEPA and SNH, the Lockwood site is restorable, therefore continued extraction is no longer acceptable, and in any case, the restoration plan falls well short of what is required in terms of reinstating wetlands, creating a suitable environment for biodiversity and for ecosystems to re-establish. The Crichton Carbon Centre have said about this application that they disagree with the developer, that their restoration techniques have changed little in the last few decades, which indicates a lack of understanding and awareness of best practice and how to implement this. Members, in conclusion, refusing this application will retain and protect remaining carbon storage capacity at Lockwood Moss. In circumstances where you might be minded to support the planning application, I would ask you to pay close attention to the contributions of both SEPA and SNH on the inadequacy of the applicant's restoration plan. It is regrettable that refusing this application will impact adversely on the applicant's business. However, I would ask members to reflect carefully on our commitment to do everything we can in Dumfries and Galloway to tackle climate change, and I ask that you give weight to the submissions by SNH and SEPA and refuse this application, which otherwise both practically and reputationally would undermine our commitment to tackle climate change. In recognition of our climate emergency declaration and the harmful impact that approval would have on climate change, please endorse the officer's recommendation to refuse this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Dougie. And one of my colleagues has reminded me that because you're an elected member, you should be allowed to speak last. However, that I'm sure you will accept an apology on, and your representation has been made. Do any members of the Planning Applications Committee have any questions for Councillor Campbell? If not, we'll go to the registered speaker, the agent, who is Ewan Pearson. Again, Ewan, you will have 5 minutes to make your presentation to the committee members. I will remind you with 30 seconds to go to draw your presentation to a conclusion. And if you've been kind enough to remain online until members have the opportunity to ask you questions, I'd be grateful for that. So again, Ewan, just whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for letting me speak. Can I just say, though, that I've not seen any of the slides that Andrew Robinson showed the councillors. So I don't know what he's shown you. The crux of this application seems to be the climate change emergency and whether or not there's going to be a detrimental effect on the environment with continued working. Before we made the application, we asked for a screening direction from the Scottish Government, and they came back and said categorically that there wasn't any significant environmental effects associated with continued working. That included the question of CO2 emissions. The site at the moment has been worked for 35 years. Any carbon that's captured in the peat itself, it's sitting there and being milled. It doesn't actually release any CO2 into the atmosphere. The concern here is what happens when the peat is then used off-site. I think there's a bit of a misnomer generally that peat it then goes to B&Q in places like that, but it doesn't. It goes into food production. And a lot of the peat from my client operates other sites in Dumfries and Galloway and has a mix and bagging plant at Easterbrook. A lot of the peat is sold directly to the Forestry Commission, part of their afforestation plans across the UK. And a lot of the peat goes to like these salad producers to grow vegetables, lettuces, mushrooms. You quite often see all these polytunnels on the side of the road. So it's a growing media. It's not going to B&Q. So the carbon from the peat is then transferred into whatever the product is that the purchaser's using. So if it's food, it's then consumed by human beings because we need carbon. We're a carbon-based life form. Turning to the bog itself, the extension stopped because the peat itself has not been extracted at the rate anticipated because of rainfall. They're only taking off about 7.5 centimetres a year, not 12 centimetres that it states in the report. And if you put into context how much CO2 is produced in the UK, 351 million tonnes, you know, you're talking about a very, very small contribution, if anything, to the CO2. In terms of Scottish planning policy, which basically is what we're looking at here from 2014, it does say, quite rightly, as Andrew Robinson pointed out, that peat extraction shouldn't be allowed where a site cannot be restored. And I've actually had discussions with Victoria Key about this. All sites can be restored. This site was originally an agricultural field, and if we restored it to an agricultural field, it could be restored. What my client's proposing here is to restore it to peatland, which is entirely consistent with the SNH's peatland objectives. And of course, carbon sequestration, as it's called, only occurs where you introduce mosses that actually, or other vegetation that actually capture the carbon that's in the atmosphere. So I would argue that we're doing exactly what the development plan and the peatland policy is intended to achieve. It's to restore and create new peatland, which then acts as a carbon sink. Another thing that wasn't discussed with officers was the actual 10-year period. You know, it's open to this authority to impose a condition, putting whatever period of time you want. You can put 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years. So my client is happy to accept a lesser period than 10 years. 10 years is historically what they've been asking for on their other mosses. So as I say, you know, it's open to you to grant permission today, and you can put a condition restricting it to less than 10 years, and that would be acceptable. Or you can continue consideration of the application for information such as the CO2 calculation, which we've never been asked to provide, and we can give you a full restoration plan if it's what you want. But that's normally reserved to a condition for the period before extraction ceases. I'm conscious of my time. I've only got 30 seconds. So I would encourage you either to continue this for further discussion and information to be submitted, or approve it with a reduced time period of 5 years, if that's what you're inclined to do. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pearson. Before I ask members if there are any questions for you, you did make an observation at the start of your presentation that you hadn't seen the slides that Andrew Robinson had shown elected members. On the chat column on the right-hand side of Teams, that set of slides is already uploaded and you should be able to access them. If not, if you're anxious to see them, we can try and have them sent directly to you. It's up to you whether we can have a recess and get them sent to you.
I'm not anxious to see them. I was just pointing out that I couldn't see them. That was all. It's not, I don't think it's that important, to be honest.
Okay, and you're happy to progress without seeing them?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Okay then, do any members have any questions for Mr. Pearson, the agent for the applicant? If not, then thank you very much for your presentation, sir. Members are now in session and will determine the application. Councillor Martin.
It's more a point of clarification. The applicant there just actually said that it would take less than 10 years. The application today is for 10 years. So, as I say, would we need to refuse this application and another application we need to come in?
I'll ask
Because
David,
this is
but
the
I think we
application
can
in
place a
front of us is for
condition on
10
that.
years.
David, what's your advice to Councillor Martin?
Thank you, Chair. Andrew's report actually does set out on page 30 about how you can actually determine Section 42 applications, where it is considered that permission should be granted subject to different conditions or no conditions. A new permission should be granted and all conditions attached. So it is open to yourself to choose a different period. Certainly how we've considered it and how it's been determined is on the 10-year basis, but it is open to yourself. Another thing I would point out as well is that because there's an objection of a key agency of the Scottish Government, you wouldn't be able to approve it today. It would have to be referred to the Scottish Ministers to decide if they wish to call it in or not.
Thanks for that, John. Are there any other members with a question for the agent? Oh, I have Jim McComb, followed by Ian Carruthers. So Jim McComb, please. And it's a question for the agent.
It is indeed, Chair, yes.
Oh no, we're in session. Sorry, no, it's all right. It's my fault. We are in session. Aye. So it's right. We're in session. Councillor McComb.
No, I think the agent is required to answer this question, which is, are there alternative products the customers could use if peat production is cut back?
Well, I don't know whether that's for the agent or no, because the agent is representing an applicant that's looking to extract peat. It'll not be his duty to tell us whether there are alternatives or no. But Mr. Pearson, do you have a view on that?
In terms of, I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to answer this as simply as possible. I mentioned earlier about B&Q and Homebreeds and all these retailers. Peat used to go to them, and then amateur gardeners would buy bags of peat and put it on their gardens or whatever they were doing. That doesn't happen anymore because they've developed alternatives to that, like bark and all these organic materials. But the peat from this site goes into food production, so you can't produce mushrooms and tomatoes and salad leaves. You certainly can't produce whiskey without peat. So I guess at the moment there's no alternative.
Thank you. Councillor Carruthers.
Thanks, Chair. I attempted to put my hand up before when the agent was still speaking, so the question was probably pointed at him. It was pointed at him initially, but I mean, there's been further information from David that adds to that, David City that is. But I feel very strongly, when I read this report and what I've heard today, I felt very strongly that, okay, it's based on the level of CO2 emissions is the reason for objections by all parties here. So I agreed with that entirely, but when I hear the further information coming through that's saying actually the CO2 emissions here, the use of the actual peat is different to what the normal position is, and it's something negligible. I just wonder, do we need to defer for further information to get absolute clarity in regards to this? But I'll take advice. I mean, it's a bit of a question towards the agent. What is the actual factual figures? Do you have that to hand in regards to the level of CO2 emissions? And I'd like to take advice, Chairman, if you don't mind, from a planning advisor.
Okay, can you be very specific on what advice you're looking for and condense it into as few words as possible, please?
I suppose it's roundabout, Chairman, in particular. We've got new information here that says actually the crux of the reason for refusal is because of climate change emergency, but the level of CO2 emissions that this would contribute towards that. But the information has been given to us, but it's contrary to what I feel is in the report and what's been presented to us today to say, listen, that's not factually true. So the information, the guidance that I'm needing and advice is around about the actual factual, the way it's been reported, factually the way it's been reported within the report that we've got, and the conflict of information we're getting from the agent. So it is really positive too. So two-part, that is put out a plan of advisors. How should we consider that in real terms? Advice in regards to that, I know we make our own decisions, Chairman, but secondly, what is the level of CO2 emissions? Do we have that to hand from the agent?
Carruthers, you claimed you had your hand up to speak to the agent and that was overlooked, so we'll maybe allow you to ask the agent the question, then I'll come to David Sutty. But we are in session, so we shouldn't be going back to asking questions. I'll accept that you'd indicated you wanted to speak and that wasn't picked up. So, you have a question for the agent first.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for accepting that. And it is just simply, do you have the information to hand to validate your claims in regards to the CO2 emissions being very low, Ewan?
All I can say to you is that the screening direction, which I hope you've seen, makes it clear that there is no significant environmental damage. So we did not consider it necessary to do a calculation because of what the screening direction said. We haven't been asked to do a calculation. I only picked this up when I saw the report last week. We can do the calculation. We can use whatever methodology your officers require, but I don't have that in front of me today.
Okay, I'll now come to David Sutty and ask David to respond to your inquiry as well. I know Andrew's there as the case officer, but David's with us, so I'll ask David to deal with it.
Thank you, Chair. With your agreement, I probably would like to bring Andrew in as well, just because of his technical knowledge on it. My view on this is that you do have sufficient information before yourselves today, and you have a clear reason for it in policy terms for refusal, rather than just in terms of the actual volume of carbon dioxide, which may or may not be released from this. So I think what you've got on page 40 and 41 does set out the issues quite clearly. Just another little aside in terms of the screening opinion, whilst we have to clearly accept that the second screening opinion, which was requested from the Scottish Ministers, took a different view, as you'll see on page 18, paragraph 1.5. The officer's opinion was that it was an environmental impact assessment application and would have had significant environmental impact. We were effectively overruled on that by the Scottish Ministers, but officers were of a different opinion. With your permission, Chair, I wonder if Andrew might have any comments on that.
Absolutely, David. Andrew, if you're with us, would you like to comment on the question Councillor Carruthers has posed, please?
Yes, Chair. In terms of the EI screening opinion, that's very much of whether it's considered it would have a significant environmental impact. It doesn't mean to say that it wouldn't have an impact. So as part of the screening opinion that the council issued, we considered that information was required on carbon emissions. The Scottish Ministers issued a direction considering that that wasn't required in an EIA sense, but that doesn't mean to say that it wasn't an issue. Secondly, on the actual information for CO2, there was a consultation response. It was either SNH or SEPA. I'd have to look through the report again just to see exactly where it was. But one of the consultees said that the level of emissions could not be demonstrated. So if the applicant is saying something contrary to that and saying it can be, then that's an issue. But the reason that it wasn't asked is one of the consultation responses came back from the statutory consultee saying that it couldn't be. I would just have to look through the report to find out exactly where that was.
Chair, if that I can assist there, page 24, paragraph G on the SNH comments.
So you have page 24, paragraph G. Andrew.
Okay, that's
Just to assist, what it says is SNH consider that the applicant has not and could not demonstrate how they would minimise CO2 release, as this would be an inevitable consequence of peat extraction.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Councillor Hislop.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question for the officers, just to reiterate a point possibly. Within paragraph 410, page 31, there are 3 criteria that would allow us to extend this. Have any of those criteria been met in this occasion? You know, it says the deposits have been significantly damaged by human activity, the conservation value is low, and restoration to functioning peatland is not possible. Do any of those apply in this occasion?
I think the report rehearses a response to that, but Andrew, do you have a response for Councillor Hislop?
Yes, Chair. The policy requires all 3 of the criteria to be met. Now, the report states that it considers that the first 2 criteria would be met, in that it's considered that the deposits on the site have been significantly damaged by human activity and the conservation value is low. However, the report considers that because restoration to functioning peatland is possible, that actually the proposal wouldn't meet that part of the policy. It can only be, in terms of the 3rd criteria, it can only be supported under that policy where restoration to functioning peatland is not possible and it's considered that it could be.
Thank you, Andrew. Any other members? If not, we go to determine the application. Any view? Oh. You want to come back, Councillor Hislop?
Chair, it was only to say that that was my understanding, and with that confirmation that that is the case, I would move that we accept the officer's recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Hislop. I've now got Councillor Dryborough.
Thanks, Chair. If Councillor Hislop is proposing that we accept the recommendations of the officer, I would happily second that.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any alternative views amongst other members present today? If not, the decision is unanimous. Tracy, can you confirm the decision of this committee this morning, please?
Yes, Chair. Members have agreed to refuse the application on the grounds detailed in the report.
Thank you. Okay, members, we move on to agenda item number 5. When I can find it. This is an application for A, planning permission for change of use of steading building to form 3 dwelling houses, installation of shared septic tank and entrance gates, and B, listed building consent for alterations to steading building to form 3 dwelling houses and installation of replacement entrance gates, an existing opening on a boundary wall at Kirkland, Tinrun, Thornhill. The application type is A, full application, and B, listed building consent. The applicant is Mr. Gray. Reference numbers are A, 20/0444/full, and B, 20/0445/LBC. The recommendation is to approve A and B subject to conditions, and the case officer is Mary Mitchell. Mary, can you lead us through your presentation, please?
Yes, good morning. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, very well, thanks, Mary.
Good. Well, this application is for the change of use of a traditionally built steading building to form 3 dwelling houses. The building is category C listed and it lies within the Tinrun conservation area. Proposed alterations include the reuse of existing apertures, into which new windows, doors and recessed timber panelling is to be inserted. These would all be timber with a solid paint finish. The glazed elements are to be multi-pane with through astracals. The window opening mechanism is to be tilt and turn. A number of new conservation style roof lights are to be installed, and a number of new openings are also to be formed. Details of the sills and lintels are to be provided under condition. Other aspects of the proposal seek to regularise retrospective works, which are 1, the demolition of a freestanding curved wall, and 2, the installation of a new vehicle access gate. This application has been brought to committee because the Tinrun Community Council has objected to some of the proposed detailing as listed under paragraph 2.1 in the report. Planning services, however, consider the development to comply with the relevant policies and deem the character of the listed building and the character of the conservation area to be preserved and enhanced by the development. The recommendation is for approval subject to compliance with conditions. I'll just run you through the images, which I hope you're all seeing okay.
Fine at the moment. Yes, Mary.
Yep, good. The site is to the east of Tinrun village, as outlined here. Kirkland House is just to the south of the site, that you can see there. The applicant owns most of the surrounding land on that side of the road. So the steading building is in a U shape, and the drawing here shows that they're planning house number 1 to be to the north, house number 3 to the south, and house number 2 to the west of the existing steading building. Part of the steading that's described as garage, that's to be kept as storage for Kirkland House. You can also see where the curved wall used to be. There's a red curved line there. And the vehicle entrance, which is to be blocked up, is just to the left of that curved wall. So these are the existing elevations and floor plan
Mary,
of Dwelling House 1.
Mary,
yes?
could you advise us when you want the slides moved on, and we'll do it from this end?
Oh, okay, right. Are you on slide 19?
No, I don't think so. Can you see what we are showing here from your side?
No. I've obviously got my own presentation going.
Okay.
Okay, just carry on, Mary.
So I'm on slide 19, which is showing the existing elevations and floor plans of Dwelling House 1. On to the next slide, please. So this is the proposed elevations of Dwelling House 1. You can see they're reusing all the existing apertures on the inside of the courtyard there. They're forming a new aperture on the gable end of that of house number 1 as well. Next slide, please. This is showing details of the windows to be inserted into house number 1. There are all sorts of sizes because the aperture sizes that exist are various sizes. Next slide. That's showing existing elevations of Dwelling House number 2. On the courtyard elevation, there's a large sliding door there, which is to be retained along with the rail as a feature. Next slide. So this is the proposed elevations and floor plans of house number 2. You can see most of the existing apertures are to be reused. On the west elevation, 1, 2, 3, 4, there are 5 new well, 4 new windows to be formed and 1 windows to be enlarged. Next slide. So again, dwelling house number 2. That's just showing the upper floor. Next slide. Again, the windows for dwelling house number 2. Next slide. This is dwelling house number 3, the existing elevations and floor plan. Next slide. The proposed elevations and ground floor plan. Again, all the existing apertures are to be reused. 3 new skylights are going on to that roof slope that you can see on the south. Next slide. This is the inside the courtyard elevation. So 2 new windows going in there. They're making 1 aperture a bit smaller. So those are the proposed elevations. Next slide. And these are the proposed windows to go into house number 3. Next slide. These are the sections showing that the windows are to have through astragals. Some are to be casement windows, some are to be tilt and turn windows. And then the other section is showing the one of the glass door sections. Next slide. This is the horizontal sections of those windows. Next slide. This is details of the roof lights. Next slide. This is showing the height of the wall. There's not a lot of detail there, but next slide. This is the details of the vehicle access gate that was installed. You can see its height and width there. The gap in the stone wall was already there. This vehicle access gate replaced one which had completely rotted away. Next slide. Okay, we're on to the photos now. So this is the B-listed vehicle entrance gates, and this is the access to the houses which would be used. Next slide. This is looking down the public road. The steading building is to the left there. Next slide. This is showing the retrospective gate which is in. Next slide. This is looking up the public road. A large window is to be formed on that nearest wall that you can see on the steading building. Next slide. This is inside the site, showing the vehicle access gate. That timber shed is to go as well. Next slide. This is the vehicle access would take place up that track there. That's all existing. Next slide. So you can see Kirkland House in the corner to the left there. The main part of that photograph shows where the garage of the steading building is, and that's going to be retained by Kirkland House. Next slide, please. To the right of this photograph, you can see that's where house number 1 would go. Next slide, please. This is looking at the east elevation inside the courtyard. Sorry, showing the west elevation. I think that should say east. Looking west, showing east elevation. And that's the sliding timber door which would be retained. Again, showing house number 1. Next slide, please. Sorry, that's house number 1. Next slide. That is house number 2. Next slide, please. Showing where the garage would go. Next slide, please. This is walking around the outside of the steading buildings now. Next slide, please. This is showing the south elevation of the application building. Next slide, please. Showing the upper floor of that same south elevation. Next slide. This is one of the existing openings which is to be reused. Next slide, please. Another of the existing openings to be reused. Next slide, please. So this is showing the west elevation of the steading building, and this is where 4 new windows are to be put in. Next slide, please. This is the last of the photographs, and this is showing one of the existing windows, well, the only existing window on that on that west elevation. Well, the recommendation is for approval, subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mary. Any members have any questions for the case officer? Councillor McKee.
Thanks, Chair. My question was regarding dwelling house 2. I've seen there's like, I think they were classed as storm windows on the roof. Are they being built? They are new windows. And a question on the windows, are they to be wooden framed windows? There's no metal framed windows.
Mary?
Yes, all the windows are to be timber with a paint finish. Which elevation of house 2?
That's a good question. It was showing the roof, and there was the storm windows on the roof. I was wondering if they were being built or if they are already existing.
Could you go to slide 23, please, Tracy? Was it, this is house number 2 here.
Are those storm windows on the roof there?
Well, they're conservation roof lights.
They are, okay. No, it's just the way I seen it. I thought I seen them, but they looked like storm windows, and I were wondering if they were being built out. But
No, nothing like that, no.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks, Councillor McKee. Councillor McComb?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentation, Mary. A couple of points. Can you confirm there will be no change in the footprint of the building?
No.
Thank you. And secondly, are there any plans to divert or otherwise change the ditch on the west side of the site?
Mary?
No, there's nothing about changing the ditch at all. Looking at plan slide 17, you can see there's the soak-away system from the proposed shared septic tank would go towards where the drainage ditch is.
Yes.
So that would need to be well designed to make sure it didn't impact on that.
But other than that, there are no plans to alter the ditch.
No.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McComb. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask about the windows. I'm looking at, I think probably the one that might illustrate it most clearly is slide 25. I'm sort of minded to think that perhaps Chinran Community Council has got a bit of a point here about the detailing of all these windows. When we convert steadings, Mary, in the past, I seem to remember that the drive was to maintain the sort of openings and the blackness of, or the darkness of, an opening of a steading. By putting these very detailed astragals, I mean, they're really quite fussy, really. You are going to change the nature of that building quite substantially. And my understanding originally was, and I am talking about a long time ago, was that the guidance that we had was about maintaining the openings so that they looked originally like the buildings that they were first designed to be. In other words, agricultural buildings or ancillary buildings to larger houses, as they would be in this particular instance, the steading. So to put in such a kind of confusion of astragals in a building like this, I would suggest is not entirely appropriate. I'd be glad to have your comments.
Mary?
Yes, I would agree. The point is to try and make the most of the character of the existing building, and I would have thought single pane windows and doors would have looked far less fussy and simple. That is not what the applicant wanted to submit, and we thought on the whole what was being proposed was all right as well. It wasn't it wouldn't have been my preferred, but it isn't. I mean, it's still acceptable. I would say they are timber windows. They are they do have through astragals, and I think once in place, I mean, in the drawing it probably looks more clustered than it would in real life. Yeah.
Councillor Maitland, I'll come back to you at the very end, if that's all right with you, because if we get to a situation where we need to determine the thing, the application at that stage, I'll come back to you and ask you if you have a view on the windows themselves, unless you have any other point at this moment in time.
No, not just if I could just be absolutely clear whether our policies on changing the look of steadings would actually encompass this sort of cluttered looking detail. It's just to be clear about the policies that we have already, because that's what we should be following.
Absolutely, but if members are not happy with the windows, we can address that either by a rejection or a condition. I'll take advice from David when we get to that. We have only one more speaker at the moment, Councillor Maitland, then I'll certainly come back to you. Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Mary. I'm really quite impressed by Tinran Community Council's representation here. It's very precise and very well put. I'm looking particularly at two certain parts here. One is part C, and just if Mary can maybe tell us if there is enough amenity ground, or what amenity ground is there. Should there be children, for example, living at this location? And in part E is the existing vehicle access should not be used as it creates visibility and road safety issues. And if I picked Mary up right, I think she said retrospective, because it appears as though that new entrance has already been put in place and some internal walls have already been knocked down. Is that the case?
Mary?
There are two retrospective elements to the application. If you go to slide 18, you can see there's a curved red line going from the public road, the C119N, going towards the Stedding building. So there was a freestanding curved wall there, about 2 metres in height, and it was demolished. And that is part of the retrospective proposal. Just to the left of where that curved wall meets the public road, there is an existing gap in the stone wall, so there was always a vehicle entrance in there. The retrospective element is the installation of the vehicle access gate, which was, you saw pictures of the new gate, and that was installed without the correct permissions in place as well.
Thank you, Mary. Councillor Ferguson, we're still just questions for the case officer, so if you want to come back, that's fine. If you want to come back when we're in session, that'll be fine too.
Yes, one more question, if you could, Chair. So, Mary, I've not seen the site you have. How far is it from that corner to the extended planet or the extended opening there? Bearing in mind that when that original entrance was put in place, it was horses and carts that came around that corner, not 4x4s.
Mary?
Sorry, the distance from where to where?
If you go to the slide that shows the new opening and looking down towards Tinrun.
Yeah.
It's how far is it from that entrance to the corner?
Oh, the corner of the public road. Well, that vehicle access gate isn't to be used. It was one of the conditions from the Roads Authority that access be properly stopped up and stopped up permanently.
Okay, thank you. That's answered my question.
Okay.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Andy. Okay, Pauline Drysdale. Councillor Drysdale.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mary, for your presentation. Could I just go back to page 46, please, point 1.4, Mary, to ask about the original outbuilding in the south wing, whereby that's going to be retained unaltered. Could I just check that it goes back to Councillor Maitland's points about the sort of continuity between the door designs and the windows, which are going to look, in my mind, quite different, albeit the whole building will look good, but the garage and storage space, so the garage door, Mary, is that to remain as is? So it will be that, from memory from the slide, it was just plain black, is that correct, and wooden, so that will not be changed in any way, or will it? Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Pauline. Mary?
So slide number 18 is being shown at the moment. You mean the main door for the garage element?
I do, yes. I couldn't quite see from the report. It was a little bit unclear. It's possibly my reading of it, but in one respect, it reads as if it's going to remain unaltered. And then later on in the report, it says that some things will be changed. In my mind, I was thinking possibly it was going to be like the entrance that's been changed with the wood and the metal surround, or is it going to have windows in it? There was just a little bit of lack of explanation there, but perhaps I'm missing it. Sorry if I am.
The garage, which is shown on the plan there, isn't to be altered. There are no changes proposed to that part of the building.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks, Pauline.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions for the case officer, I now agreed to accept a late representation, which is a bit of correspondence that Tracy will read out on behalf of Mary Newbold, who's a member of Tinrun Community Council. Tracy, you have 3 minutes. Whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Tinrun Community Council wish to state that they are in favour of the development of Kirkland Stedding to provide accommodation. However, our concern around this planning application is that the property is within the village conservation boundary and that the buildings themselves are listed. Tynran Community Council previously raised the issue with the planning officer that works have already taken place to demolish a listed curved wall, and in addition there are currently interim remedial maintenance works taking place with no evidence of an application for listed building consent to ensure that the work is compliant in terms of materials and structure. We note that the latter is not mentioned in the report to the Planning Committee. In the opinion of the Community Council, and in comparison with drawings for other listed buildings within our area, the plans themselves lack sufficient detail to establish whether the proposed works would comply with the restrictions that have been placed on other buildings within our conservation area and other local listed buildings, hence our concern. We note that the recommended decision in the committee planning report makes reference to some of the points that we raised with regard to detailed design. However, it would appear that exceptions to local design standards have been made regarding blocking up of existing entrances with timber cladding and some inconsistency with regard to window frames in terms of what has previously been permitted in the Conservation Village and neighbouring listed buildings. Please could the planning officer confirm that tilt and turn windows may now be considered acceptable within Tynran Conservation Area and appropriate for use in listed building conservations of a similar era and style.
Thanks, Tracy. Mary, you've already said that you found that not to your liking but acceptable, so we'll just move on from there.
Could I just confirm there's a difference between a domestic traditional building? I mean, sash and case windows are what, timber sash and case windows is what is recommended for most traditional properties. In a steading building, there's a different character going on. It's a much more practical type of building. There's less formality about it, and you'll see all sorts of different shapes of traditional, of the original openings of that steading building. And they have something like the timber panelling, which is shown in the proposed drawings. That can make the most of an aperture because it helps to it keeps the stone surrounds of the existing opening, and it makes the most of. If you go to slide 20, you can see there's windows being proposed on top of timber. On top of timber panelling, and the timber panelling would be recessed, and the window would be a little recessed as well. And I think, you know, that makes the most of the existing coined openings. It's a tilt and turn opening because sash and case would look too domestic on that elevation. It's a very, I mean, there's a variety of sizes of windows there which fit in with the general character of the steading. Whether there are astracals or not in the window, I mean, I would have thought no astracals would make a simpler looking design, but I didn't think that was such an element to refuse the application on. Only the tilt and turn window, I don't think is an issue.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, Mary's explained her logic or thinking along that. So two members that were expressing some concern.
Point of order, Chair. I have a point of order, Chair. I'm just wondering why you're giving the case officer another bite at it. She seemed to have more than enough time to put her case, and then she come back with the same thing again. I don't think there's any need for that.
Thanks for that, Councillor. So, and it was a question posed by the applicant in a letter, and it's reasonable to try and address that, which is why the case officer came back in. But we're in session, so we've got Councillor Maitland and Councillor Ferguson who had raised issues about this application. Councillor Maitland first. We are now in session, Councillor Maitland.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Yes, I found it very helpful to have it explained to us about the tilt and turn mechanism above the wooden panelling. So thank you for that. That's useful to have it explained. I still think that we perhaps are not following our own guidance with respect to the non-domestic type of steading building. I think we would have been probably more respectful of the type of building had we had non-astragals in some of the bigger openings. That garage, I think, with that opening is going to look completely extraordinary. I am minded to suggest to the members that we agree it with the exception to the window design, which we require to be discussed with the officers so that they actually can come to some agreement with respect to the opening and the designs of the windows to respect the steady type nature of the building. It's not a change from a domestic building. It's a complete, it's an agricultural ancillary building to a large house. And I would suggest that everything is good about it. Everything is good about the application, but I think they might have got this one wrong. So I leave it with you, Chairman, just to sort of find out what other members think. But that's my feeling at the moment.
I'll come back to you, Councillor Maitland. I presume you're suggesting that we approve this subject to a window design that's found suitable and we delegate that to officers. But I'll come to you. Councillor Ferguson first. I think he's a couple of points he wanted to raise as well.
Yes, Chair, and I don't know if we can do it or not. I'll be guided by Mary or David. I'm like Jane, minded to approve in principle here, and I agree with almost everything she said. I think one condition I would like to see being absolutely clear is that the new entrance, which is wide enough for industrial vehicles, is closed first. I don't know if that's doable or not, but that would ensure that it's not going to be used then for works traffic going in and out there, which to me is actually can be a relatively busy country road.
I think that already conditioned anyway, but David?
Chair, yes, if that's of assistance, on page 53, condition 5 that's recommended does in fact require that no development shall take place unless and until details of the proposed method of stopping up of the existing vehicular access has been submitted to and approved in writing by the planning authority. So that's already covered in a recommended condition.
So that's already sorted, Andy. Thanks for that. Okay, I have Councillor Hislop.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if I'm as hung up on the astragals as Councillor Maitland with regard to the smaller windows, but I have a concern with regard to the full height windows that are the same height as doors. And I don't think they look just what I would like to see in the development. The smaller windows, if you look at, I meant to see what slide it is here, it's a proposed north courtyard dwelling house 3. There's a door in the middle and there's it looks like a patio door at one side, but it's actually a fixed window, and a door at the other, a small door at the other side, but it's a fixed window. I don't like those. I think they don't suit the building, but even the actual doors that they're proposing where you've got astragals on the doors, I don't like those. I think maybe more I think it's called a stable door sort of look, where you had maybe the wood at the bottom and a window at the top would be better, but that was my view. I don't know if that helps Councillor Maitland in thinking about what she's doing or not, but I have concerns about the full height windows.
It certainly goes in tandem with Councillor Maitland's view, and it may be that we are in a position, if other members are happy to support this proposal, that we simply agree the recommendation with the exception of the windows, and that would be delegated to officers to deal with. But we'd have to have some kind of indication of what exactly we want. Otherwise, we will find ourselves in a situation where we will be finding windows installed that we maybe wouldn't have approved as well. But anyway, I have another member wanting to speak now, and if we get through that, we'll then come back and see if we can find a way, either by identifying exactly what windows and openings, apertures we want to address, or whether we just leave it to officers on the basis that we give them a sort of general direction to follow and expect to do that. But if you just bear with me, members, I now have Councillor Drysdale. Pauline? Oh, it's Councillor Drybrough, sorry.
Chair. I wasn't sure. Is it Councillor Drybrough? Have I put my hand up?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
It was
well, I
me.
would like to speak anyway, if that's all right, Chair, or do you want me to go in a different order?
It's all right, Pauline, it's my mistake. I'm not reading Tracy's writing very well. It's Councillor Drybrough. I've Councillor Drybrough, then Councillor Sloan.
Thanks very much, Chair. I agree with what Jane and Ivors actually said. It's about what's the wording we actually put into the conditions and yourself, Chair, of the application. So I think the recommendation would be to agree the application as suggested in the report. However, to agree that officers talk with the applicant, ensure that the appropriate doors are put in the appropriate vestures, if want for a better word, and that should be agreed with the planning officers.
Thanks for that, Councillor Drybrough. I've got Councillor Sloan and then Councillor Martin. Tommy?
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to move that we accept the recommendations as they are before us in the papers.
Thanks for that. John Martin?
I would second that. Like, just what I was going to say, like, we seem to be getting hung up in the windows, and we're going to be putting it back to the officers who's already agreed the design that's been put in should be passed.
Thanks for that. Okay. We have a proposal from Councillor Sloan to go with the recommendation as set out in the papers, seconded by Councillor Martin. Councillor Maitland, do you have an alternative proposal, or Councillor Ferguson or Drybrough for that matter?
I'm struggling at the moment with the exact wording, but in essence, I think there should be enough information from the members to guide the officers in what we are trying to achieve, which is to be respectful of the original openings in a steading building. Councillor Hislop has explained that he feels that the doors are too fussy with the astragals. I'm entirely with him. I understand where he's coming from as far as the domestic sized windows are concerned. Those can be agreed with the officer. She's already explained about the blocking down below and the astrals above, tilt and turn. I think that's probably acceptable. But my view is that this can be improved, and we would be both respectful of the building, of those living around who are represented by the Community Council who have expressed their worries. And I think it's not beyond the wit of officers who agree with the applicant a type of design that would be more respectful of the original type of building that this is altering.
Okay, I'll look for some advice from David Sutty. David, can you help us with this situation, please?
Yes, Chair, that's absolutely fine. You could attach a competent condition which would say along the lines that you're not giving any permission for the window design as shown on these plans. No development shall take place unless the applicant has submitted a revised scheme with a revised window type in detail, which is probably, I think you're looking for it to be more homogeneous as well, instead of have the different styles and sizes. Reducing the amount of astragals and better respecting the traditional rural agricultural nature of the building.
Jane, with that advice, are you happy just to go with that phraseology?
Very happy, Chairman. Thank you very much.
So that will be an amendment from you, following that phraseology, of Councillor Hislop and Councillor Drybrough, who also expressed a view regarding that. Do either of you look to support this proposal from Councillor Maitland?
I'm happy to second, Chair.
Okay, so we have an amendment from Councillor Maitland, seconded by Councillor Drybrough. So we'll go to the vote. Can you, Tracy, just remind us exactly, with Councillor Sloan and Councillor Martin, it's as per set out in the papers, and the amendment, please, if you just remind members what that is.
Thank you, Chair. The motion is proposed by Councillor Sloan, seconded by Councillor Martin, to agree the application as per the report. An amendment by Councillor Maitland, seconded by Councillor Drybrough, to agree to approve the applications as detailed in the report, with an additional condition regarding the window type details to be submitted and approved by the planning department to for the original stadium building to be in line with that.
David, does that sound about right?
Yes, I'm sure I'll be able to, having heard members, be able to tidy that up.
Okay, on that basis then we'll go to the vote, please, Tracy.
Chairman?
Amendment?
Vice Chairman?
Amendment.
Councillor Blake?
Amendment.
Councillor Crothers?
Motion.
Councillor Drybrough?
Amendment.
Councillor Drysdale?
Amendment.
Councillor Ferguson?
Amendment.
Councillor Giusti?
Motion.
Can we just pause, please? We have some echo going on at the moment. You've got about 6 motions there.
Councillor Hislop?
Amendment.
Councillor Lever? Amendment, Councillor Lever?
Amendment.
Thanks. Councillor McComb?
Motion.
Councillor McKee?
Motion.
Councillor Maitland?
Amendment.
Councillor Martin?
Motion.
Councillor Sloan?
Motion.
Councillor Tate?
Motion.
Councillor Young? Councillor Young?
Amendment.
And the amendment is carried 10 votes to 7.
Can you just confirm the decision of the committee, please, Tracy?
The application is approved subject to the additional condition regarding the window type detail to be submitted to planning officers.
Chair, if I can just clarify that there are 2 applications as part of this report, so I'm assuming that members are looking for that condition to be attached both to the planning permission and the listed building consent.
Is that agreed, members?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we come to agenda item number 6. The siting of 5 glamping pods, formation of car parking area, installation of septic tank and soakaway and associated landscaping at 6 Mainsif Park, Glen Luce, Newton Stewart. The application type is full planning permission. The applicant is Mrs. Sibniller, reference number 19/14001/full. The recommendation is to notify the Scottish Ministers of the Council's intention to grant planning permission subject to conditions. It's a local application and the case officer is Iona Brooke. Iona, will you take us through your presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Can I just go to the first slide with the lands? Thank you. Now, as the Chair explained, the application before you is for the siting of 5 glamping pods and the formation of car parking and associated works. The site lies approximately 0.8 miles from southwest from the centre of Glen Luce. It's a rural site which is currently under rough grazing. The green line that you can see transversing the slide in front of you is the main A75 trunk road. Beyond that is quite an area of mature woodland. We have a further area of mature woodland to the east of the site, which bounds the site of the River Luce, with agricultural land surrounding to the south and to the west. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Now, the slide before you is just similar to the one you saw previously, an aerial view, obviously. In purple, we have the main A75 trunk road. We have an area of established mature woodland to the north and to the east, agricultural land surrounding to the south. Beyond agricultural land, just at the very base of that slide, is Wigtonshire Golf Club with Luce Bay beyond that. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Permission is sought for 5 new glamping pods on the site. They'll be arranged informally and accessed via a gravel parking area and paths, which would be an extension of an existing site access. The site is small, measuring only 45 metres by 66 metres. and existing site boundaries would remain as is. Now, currently stone diking and post and wire fencing, these would remain, and a landscaping scheme has been proposed to surround the periphery of such, which would help mitigate the potential of any impact. The recommendation in this instance is for approval subject to conditions. Whilst we have no third-party representations or officer call-in, the application is brought before you due to an objection from a statutory consultee. Unfortunately, if you just go on to the next slide, sorry, you'll be able to see the landscaping scheme that is proposed. The boundary on the west-hand side, it is currently the stone dike. The remaining three boundaries are the post and wire fencing, and these will be strengthened by some additional planting of native species. Now, unfortunately, the site is caught between an anticipated 1 in 1,000 and 1 in 200 fluvial floodplain. Originally, when consulted, both the Council Flood Risk Management Team and SEPA objected. SEPA cited their objections as they viewed glamping as a more vulnerable use, and therefore the proposal constitutes an increase in land use vulnerability. And they further had concerns on the development which could potentially increase flood risk elsewhere. The agent subsequently submitted further information which included a flood risk assessment, which alleviated the concerns that the flood risk team had. So the Council Flood Risk Management Team were therefore able to lift their objections. However, in this instance, SEPA have maintained their objection. While Scottish planning policy does advise a precautionary approach to flood risk, it also notes that other factors such as characteristics and design of the development should be taken into account. And in accordance with national policy, Council presumes against development that could lead to an unacceptable on or off site flood risk. Now, in this instance, the Council consider the development to be modest with minimal infrastructure, and the light touch proposal has no permanent foundations and as such is not considered to increase the risk of flooding elsewhere. If we just go on to look at some photographs, if you go on to the next slide. Now this is the main A75. You can see the mature woodland to the left with further mature woodland to the just to the north of that picture, and the site there is very level area of grassland. The next slide, there's a informal track which serves the properties. The properties are all associated historically with an agricultural unit, and that the informal track serves these properties and then terminates just beyond the site. An existing site access into the field would be used, and if you go on to the next slide, there is a concrete pad there which has previously served some of the farmstead. This concrete pad would remain and help assist to serve the existing new proposal. A gravelled area, just where that wee dung heap is to the right of that slide, there would be a gravel area there just established just to assist to provide further parking for the site. The next slide is from within the site. I'm standing on the concrete pad, just looking out over towards this bay there. The next slide is a similar view, just with me at the rear of the site, looking back towards the A75 and the mature woodland again. The next slide is looking back up towards the A75 towards Newton Stewart, and you will see the mature woodland there that just bounds the periphery of Luce, the River Luce itself. Now if we go on to the next slide, it'll show the development itself. 5 timber pods informally arranged and accessed via a gravel path. You will see at the bottom of the slide on the left hand side there is the outline of the 1 in 200 fluvial rist, and the slide on the right hand side is taken from the flood risk assessment that was provided by the agent, which again shows the area that has risk of flooding. And you'll see when you compare both slides, the area that's actually been considered for development is slightly out with that flood risk area. Therefore, officers don't consider, given how the light touch proposal has no permanent foundations and is not considered to increase the risk of flooding, we don't consider this to be a further risk and are recommending approval. However, I would like to remind you, all members, that as the recommendation is contrary to the advice of Scottish Government key agencies, if the members are minded to agree with officer recommendation, the Council will be required to notify Scottish Ministers to determine the application in this instance. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Iona. Questions for the case officer? Councillor McKay.
Just on this risk of flooding, Iona.
Yes.
Unfortunately, your photographs, in my view, seem to show it quite high ground. It doesn't show where the river is, and given it's flood, the tide comes in and out there, I would assume it'll rise and fall fairly well consistently. What kind of height are the pods above that water level, the normal water level? And are the pods on legs, or are they right direct on the ground?
Iona?
That's my concern. They're talking about flooding, and yet all the photographs don't show any water. Thank you.
Iona?
You're on mute.
Sorry, can we go back to slide 3, please? It should be the aerial photograph. Sorry, the next one, that's it. Right, if you can see in red, the site is highlighted there. There's agricultural around due south, and then we have Wigtonshire Golf Club, and then you will see the tidal mark just to the very south of that picture. That is some 800 metres from the actual physical site. Where the pod is, the lowest pod is sitting at approximately, just bear with me, I'll find it for you. The lowest pod is sitting at 5.85 metres above sea level. But it is a considerable distance from the sea in that instance, and I've never known for the sea to come up to that distance.
Thanks, Iona.
Oh, sorry, and the pods will all be, they'll just be put on a gravel base, they will not be on legs. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Chairman. It's just that the height of the land didn't look as if it was going to flood, and thanks for that answer anyway.
Thanks, Councillor McKee. Any other members for the case officer? Okay, thanks very much for the presentation, Iona. Members are now in session. If there are no proposals, I presume we'll go with the case officer's recommendation and refer this to Scottish Ministry. Oh, I've got... Where's it? Huh? Councillor Dryborough.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Sorry, I never put my hand up quick enough there. It's maybe just the technology. I wish I had the background that Iona's got, looking at her windows here. What a beautiful sight you've got there. I'm just going with the recommendations on this one, Chair. I think that when you look at the economic strategy of Dumfries and Galloway, this is going to help that as well. I think the buildings, even if they are on a floodplain, they are replaceable pretty quickly. They're made of that type thing, so I would approve go with the recommendations on this case.
Thanks, Councillor Driver. There doesn't seem to be any dissenting voices, so I presume this is a unanimous decision. Tracy, can you just confirm the decision of the committee, please?
Members have agreed to notify Scottish Ministers of the Council's intention to grant planning permission subject to conditions detailed in the report.
Thank you very much, Tracy, and thanks very much, members, for being present today, and officers. It's nice to see you, and we'll see you again next month. Thank you very much. I have no other business today.
Thank you, Chair. Must say you're looking well there. Councillor Ferguson there, his background